Introduce the reinvention of Indian Country Today and Mark Trahan. Indian Country Today's digital news site went out of business in 2017, and Mark Trahan was hired to do nothing less than bring the publication back to life. Today, ICT is reborn as a nonprofit digital news organization serving American Indians and Alaska Natives. It reaches an audience of 400,000 people each month and produces daily national programming carried on 24 public television stations. This transition from for-profit to nonprofit status has allowed ICT to grow its budget, its staff, and its audience, and Mark is going to tell us about those changes today. But first, a little about Mark. He's a member of Idaho's Shoshone-Bannock tribe. He's editor of Indian Country Today, has held endowed professorships at the University of Alaska Anchorage and the University of North Dakota, and he's now teaching a course at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University. Mark's CV also includes the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, the Arizona Republic, the Salt Lake Tribune, and the Navajo Times. He's authored and contributed to books, including Lewis and Clark Through Indian Eyes. Basically, Mark is amazing. I'll turn the program over to him now so we can learn more about Indian Country Today's transformation from for-profit to growing nonprofit news source. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Sarah. And when I hear the list of places I work, I always have to wonder why I can't hold a job. I've had an amazing run. I'm going to put it on slides now, and we'll go from there. We practiced this, so it's going to work, right?
I have total faith.
Can we see it?
Yes, looks good.
Okay. Well, let me just start by talking about the story of Indian Country Today, because I think it's an important history. And let's see if that's played. No. What are we seeing? Sarah?
I see where we had, slide 2 next to slide 3 next to one another. So
that's
maybe
how it's going to be then.
Okay, we'll deal with it. It is what it is.
Okay. So I guess I should have closed some of my screens down as a problem. We like to call Indian Country Today a 40-year-old startup. And that's because the kinds of changes we're making now are really only possible when it's a startup. And this goes back to 1992, so 40 years ago, when Tim Gallego founded Lakota Times. It was a newspaper on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, very local, very focused, and very successful. In a few years after that, he decided that there was a national audience. And so he relaunched it or rechanged the name to Indian Country Today. They actually at one point, I think very much modeled after USA Today, where they were thinking about multiple printing sites and reporters all over. So the paper was printed in both South Dakota and Arizona and distributed from those two locations. Tim Gallego, the founder, in 1988 sold the paper, and he sold it to the Oneida Indian Nation. And they had several different versions of it. And this is one of their versions. It's a magazine. And it was a national magazine, very glossy, a big staff of writers. They used to pay people really well. Generally for freelance, for example, starting at $1 a word and up. And it was very expensive. In fact, we now know from kind of forensic recounting that at one point the publication was losing about $3 million a year. So it was an ambitious publication, to say the least. In September of 2017, Indian Country Today announced that Media Network was how they were calling the company, announced it was going dark. At first, they really didn't say what the plan was. In fact, a lot of folks wondered about purchasing the entity, but they just said no, it was going dark. We now know that they were donating the assets at that point to the National Congress of American Indians. In fact, Ray Halbreder, who was the CEO, still is the CEO of Oneida Nation, Indian Nation, wrote that when the Oneida Indian Nation decided to purchase Indian Country Today Media Network, we had a singular goal in mind. We wanted to create award-winning journalism that gives voice to Native Americans wherever they lived. ICTMN clearly achieved that goal. We know that when we leave our stories to be told only by other media outlets, those stories often go untold or aren't told accurately. ICTMN proved that we do not have to sit by idly while that happens. We are very happy to donate the ICTM assets to NCAI, an organization whose entire mission is to advocate for tribal sovereignty and treaty rights and advance a common understanding of who Native nations and people are today. So when this first happened, I was teaching at the University of North Dakota. And I remember talking to NCAI and say, you know, this is really, no one wants to be a publisher right now. This is an extraordinary big decision you're taking to take this on, that things can go wrong and go south and you're committing to a lot of resources. And they kind of just said, oh, okay, we'll go for it. And then we had a series of meetings where other journalists came involved, and all of us said, look, if you're going to do this, you've got to operate it independently. And you can't have basically politicians deciding what news is. And they agreed to that. Well, about the same time, well, let me go to the next slide. This slide is my Instagram from 3 years ago. And it's actually 3 years ago last week. And it says, getting ready for my talk at NCAI, a mid-year meeting 18 about the future of Indian country today will be live streamed around 12 Eastern. And at that day, so 3 years ago this month, we relaunched the publication. We came up with a new logo. We showed people that it was going to be independent. And at that point, we had a total of 4 employees, 3 of us working on the editorial side and Heather Donovan on the sales side. And that was it. It was really small. And we knew we had to grow. And fortunately, 2 foundations almost from the beginning reached out and said, we want to help you in this process. The very first was the Bay and Paul Foundation, and they've been very important to us throughout the process. And the second was Novo Foundation, who's also been very important to us throughout the process. And because of that, we had a little room to breathe, and we were able to start planning. And I think, and this slide describes or shows the 2 logos, we knew from the beginning that everything had to be focused on the mobile device. And my thought was that so many news organizations try to make whatever they're doing mobile friendly rather than thinking about the mobile as the end game, that the mobile is everything. Because imagine a generation of people carrying news devices with them at all times, and to build a product around that, it seems like it's just a natural thing. One of the stats that blew me away that helped shape that thinking early on was millennials report that they often look at their phone before they say good morning to their partner. And it seems to me if you can't build a business off of that, then something's not right. I wrote at the time, I was blogging when I was at North Dakota, and this is what I wrote. A year ago, our Indian country today's future is cloudy at this point. It's easy to examine any news organization and see how things could be different. We think there are 100 ways Indian country today could have made it. And that's just as true when I look at my own failed media enterprises, and I have a checklist of those. And then I think, if only we had more money for creators, if only we had more funders, if only, well, never mind. There are new media enterprises and new failures, and along the way, there will be beautiful moments. When I wrote that, I had no idea that I would, one, be so involved with those beautiful moments ahead. And second, and this still blows me away, that things would happen so fast. As I said, this is just 3 years ago. Just to not get ahead of the story, but to mention, well, I'll just stick with the story as we go. Our growth has just been phenomenal. This next slide, oh, let me go back. So even though we were owned by NCAI, we wanted to concentrate on a couple of things. One was that the business model would be free, and that all of our focus would be on giving away our content. The second would be mobile. Those two things are kind of priority. I really learned the free distribution model while I was blogging. I was an editor at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. I was editor of the editorial page. And my career has been funny because I have all these jobs that I would never leave. I loved them so much. They were so much fun. And editorial page editor was one of those jobs. But the newspaper went out of business. And almost immediately, as in the next day that the paper was closed, I had a fellowship from the Kaiser Family Foundation to write about healthcare reform. And it was right when what we now know as the Affordable Care Act was coming to be. So it was a really great time to be doing that. And early on, I decided, because I had a foundation grant to cover these issues, I didn't have to worry about getting paid. And so I thought, I'm just going to give away my content and let anyone use it who wants and present it in a blog format. And the thing that really blew me away was how much it was being used. And content was in weekly newspapers, it was in dailies, it was being reused by other blogs. And that lesson really stuck with me, that I wanted to make sure that our content was the same way, that anybody could use it at any time. And if they give us credit, great. But the more important thing is that by getting it out there and being a regular source, people are going to turn to you. So we wanted to make that part of our model. On the business side, we wanted to create a nonprofit entity that was supported by a variety of things. Membership, we figured a membership would end up being about 10% of our budget. Advertising, and advertising is one of those that's interesting to some of the sessions this morning, because our advertising is on fire right now. It's running almost double from last year already. And then foundation and corporate support. And we work very hard on both of those. This slide is our growth. We hit just under or a little over 5.5 million users last year. Of that, most people do 1.27, so we reached about 7 million sessions, 8.5 million or 4 million page views. This overall slide is a little misleading because it says 53 seconds for the average time on screen, but that's only for the general site. And where you get some really misleading data from that is that classifieds and some of the other things that we carry, their screen time is 9 seconds, so it really drops it. If you actually look at our screen time for page views, we're over 3 minutes, and on some stories, we're over 5 minutes, which is really great. The bounce rate looks really high, but it's reflecting two things that are anomalies. One is that we have an amazing archive, and we can see that around school deadlines. So like last month, May and April, as people are doing the life of Pocahontas, suddenly our time on, or we'll see this huge draw on our archives. And all of those are people who just read that one story and move on. So it kind of skews that number somewhat. One of the ways we've been measuring it is folks who come to our site directly versus those who come to social media. And of our 400,000+ a month, about 15% are on the site daily at going to IndianCountryToday.com. And that's really the number we watch and the number we want to grow. And we hope to, down the road, be able to have that number be consistent at about 25%. We've set our goal of an average of 1 million page views per month, and we're hoping that that will be in the next year. This next set of demographics, I think, to me, are the most exciting thing about what we're doing, and that's both our age and gender distribution. Not many people in the media can say this, but our number one demographic is 25 to 34. And as you can see, it's pretty substantial. What's really nice, and I just looked at May's numbers a couple of hours ago. In May, the number of 18 to 24 has started to boost. And so it's now the second leading group. And we find that really encouraging. We're about 54, 55% female, which is pretty consistent across the board. And that 18 or 25 to 34 has been really consistent. And why is that? I mean, one way you could think of would be content, but I think it's because we're so mobile focused that if you want to get young people, you go where they are. And the mobile phone is exactly where that is. The next slide is how our distribution is. And you can see mobile is our primary vehicle. It's about 70%, but if you factor in tablets, which we would do that, it's really 75%. And again, that's been pretty consistent. We like to joke that Indian Country Today is in its fourth world. The first world was Indian Country Today 1 with Tim Gallego. Indian Country Today did 2, ICT2 was Oneida Indian Nation. ICT3 was National Congress of American Indians. And as of March 29th, we have launched ICT4, which is Indian Country Today as a nonprofit independent entity. I really love, we have a partnership we'll tell you about with the Associated Press, but when they covered the story about our separation from NCAI, their headline was, Indian Country Today has a new owner itself. And I think that really captured it. Looking at my notes here. We try to do things with a variety of rethinking processes. And one of them is being really open to partnerships and how we consider folks potential partners. One, for example, that we worked on very early and we haven't done lately, but mostly because of the pandemic, is we call a media fellowship, where we'll call somebody from primarily a tribal newspaper and say, why don't you come work with us for 3 months and then go back to your own paper. And the thought there is that this will improve the quality of the reporting just because they'll be working with our editors. And also that it will help us strengthen the relationship with local papers. And we've done 2 of those now. And now that the pandemic is manageable, we'll probably pick up and start doing more media fellowships because we just see it as a way to grow potential talent, both at the local level and to work with us. Our first media fellow was Polly Dennett-Clough from the Navajo Times, and she just went to work for the Texas Observer.
Mark?
Yes.
Oh, we do have a question that I just wanted to pop in with. Barbara Rabb is asking, who do you consider to be your editorial peer group, or if you prefer competition, sort of who else is covering these issues?
There are other folks that cover these issues. Native News Online is probably the most significant new publication, and it started maybe 5 years ago. And they probably have about 3/4 of our audience. Indian Z is another one that's mostly a web, where they repackage stories. Very small staff with both of them. And we don't really consider competition because if they wanted help or they wanted to run our stories, we would be open to that. One of the exciting things is there's a lot more regional ones growing up. Buffalo's Fire is a good example of that. And I think that's really exciting to see some of that where they're focused on a region. And the more ways we can partner with those type of organizations, we'd be for it. One thing that's really unusual about us and in the media landscape, and this probably goes back to a lesson I learned as a young publisher in Idaho. And I was at the Moscow Pullman Daily News, and I just came out of the newsroom in the Salt Lake Tribune, been a publisher for a few weeks, and I looked at the salaries of our staff and was just blown away by how little reporters made. And this is the university town, so people got a job, got 3 or 4 months experience and moved on to another job. And it occurred to me that when people come from a college, the day they start, their debts are due, so they have to start paying college loans. And so I wanted to, I asked at the time, both staff and experts in the field, is it better to have fewer people and pay them better, or more people and pay them less? And at that time, I came down clearly on the side of pay more and have fewer. And it's a lesson that's carried through to Indian Country Today. we really pay people well, and we want that to be part of our DNA. That when someone comes to us, that one, we want them to stay here, and we want to invest in them and build a career. But two, we want this to be not just a first job, but a career place that they can build a long-term promise. And so we've really worked to make that happen. With the digital side, we basically have a story plan and a daily budget meeting at noon that plans both that day and the next day. And right now we're at the position where we have a lot of stories we can tap, whether it be from the Associated Press or other news sources such as our partners. Arizona Cronkite would be an example of that, Gaylord, Underscore. We have a variety of partners we can do. And also staff driven. And it's funny because as fast as we've grown, and they're now 18 full-time employees, and I mentioned we were just 4 2 years ago, to including with broadcast contractors, a total of about 26. And as we've grown, even now, and I know that every editor knows this to be true, there are days when I'll talk to managing editor Jordan Bennett McGay about a story that would be fun to do. And she'll say, I just don't have anybody. And so we're at that point still where we feel like we need to grow larger in order just to fulfill our mission. And that's kind of where we're at.
Mark, on the question sort of related to growth, we have a question from Angela about funding. She says, can you talk about your funding structure and if you're currently funded to cover place-based news beats?
Just say the last part again.
If you're currently funded to cover place-based news beats.
We don't cover place-based news beats yet. Well, yeah, we do sort of. So right now, we are, since we're independent, we have to be very careful to operate in the black, and we are doing so. As we get new funding, we grow basically. Our funding runs to about 30% advertising, about 15% donations, and the rest is funding from large donors or foundations. And that pretty much is how we're probably going to fund going forward. Foundations will always be a very important part of that, and we spend a lot of time on that. We opened our first bureau 2 years ago, or a year ago, January, in Anchorage, Alaska. And this kind of goes back, unfortunately, it's not a clean narrative. It gets a little complicated. This goes to broadcast. So, and I'll get back to these questions because it kind of goes back into it. In 2018, we realized, and I'm showing a picture of an anchor desk, that there was going to be an extraordinary story with the election, that we knew that more Native Americans were going to win office than had ever been elected before. We felt like the national media wasn't going to cover it. We wanted to do something more than just our digital presence. So on a whim, it really was a whim, and 6 months before, or 6 weeks before the election, we decided to put together an election night broadcast to be carried live. And we eventually carried it for 5 hours. It was on FNX, First Nations Experience Television Network, and carried also across the country on Native Voice One radio. It was an amazing success. We had folks having watch parties across the country, some watching it on Facebook Live, some on broadcast. And almost immediately, everybody involved in the project said, what can we do next? And our thought was, well, what if we could create a daily newscast from that and kind of change the ecosystem that way? So I ended up calling folks that I thought might be potential partners. Maryland was on my list, University of Maryland, because we were in DC at the time, and Arizona State University. And the dean at Arizona State University at the time, Chris Callahan, said, well, I don't think you have enough money to do a daily show, but why don't you do a weekly show? And why don't you come to Arizona State and make it happen? And after several conversations after that, we decided that it was a real deal. They offered us office space, studio. I mean, talk about something you can't say no to. It was just incredible. And we came out here, I moved, and at that point, the folks in DC stayed in DC, and we did all the hiring from then on here. Since then, we've hired people using the ASU model at University of Alaska Pacific University, and we'll probably build another partner into this very soon with other growth plans. We planned for a weekly newscast, and we started doing prototypes and talking to people, buying equipment, talking to reporters. And the slide I'm showing now is the election night broadcast. And then when the pandemic hit, and I'm showing a screen of Patty Talahongava in her living room, when the pandemic hit, we started doing these Zoom calls. And the Zoom calls were being transmitted, and we saw that there was an audience for them. And somebody said, can you do these 2646? If nothing else, FNX would like to broadcast them. And so we did. FNX started broadcasting them. And then within a week, I mean, talk about light speed, Arizona PBS picked it up, and we were on the air here. And pretty soon it started to grow. And we realized that there was a market for a daily news show. Like I said, it happened really fast. And because of Zoom, we were able to do things with technology that we couldn't have done if we were starting from scratch. People were willing to accept, one, this living room, and two, were willing to accept just straight interviews without any B-roll or some of the things that a camera normally would do. And it became such a thing that we realized that it was going to require an investment, and we should continue. And as we started talking to funders, we saw that there was an opportunity for growth. Since then, we've expanded. The daily newscast is now, as Sarah mentioned, in several states across the country. We're in Australia every day. We have a large audience in Winnipeg, which we love. We get all kinds of stuff from them. And just last month, we opened a new set, and that's that. When this was a great innovation story. Arizona State University was throwing away a set from a previous news show, and it really looked horrible. It looked like a 1950s set. And in fact, that where you see the logo on the set is a big giant screen, or a big giant wall. And it was, in the old set, a big tile wall. And they used to call it the bathroom wall. And none of the producers could figure out to do with it because it was just this big, ugly wall. And we actually have plans for this in our next iteration as we grow. As soon as we raise $15,000 just for this spot, we want to put a media wall there and really show kind of some great technology. This is our team working on the set, and seeing Arizona State was very gracious. They gave us Studio A, and so we have a place every day and can plan it. One of the things we do now is that we edit the show live. So we record it at 8 a.m. We have editors sit down and cut it, so it's 26:46. Our goal before the fall is to move it into a live to tape so that we actually can get it out to stations earlier than we do now. We broadcast in most places at 7 p.m. The earliest we have is in Oklahoma at 6:30 p.m. And that's the one that's closest to deadline, because the biggest trick for us is to get closed captions. And so as soon as the show is edited, it goes out for closed captions and it comes back. When we shift to live from tape, there's actually some software that can do closed captions a little better, and we think we can actually improve that as well. I mentioned that the AP story, I just wanted to show that really quick. And then I wanted to go back, and before we go to questions, and talk about a couple of other things that we've learned. And these don't have real slides, so I'm going to take this off screen sharing and just look at everybody. maybe. I can see the button, but I can't get my
You can
mouse.
see the button. Can you click on the little arrow that's kind of to the right side of the button?
Got
You
it.
got it. You got it.
Okay. Just trying to get off on it was not fun. So a couple things that we've learned that I really like, and this one I think is really important. In the world of the mobile phone, long stories do really well. And that's something that every editor in the world would love to hear. We had a story, and it was one of the top 5 stories read last year, called "If You Don't Know Treaties, You Don't Know Sovereign. If you don't know treaties and sovereignty, you don't know history." It was 13,000 words, and we had an average read time on it of 8 minutes and 12 seconds, and 150,000 people read it. We had another story on by Crystal Echohawk on changing Elizabeth Warren's narrative, and it was 5,400 words, and it had almost 200,000 readers and 4 minutes on the time. Another story, Two Century Whodunit, from A Search for Corn Planter's Pipe, was 13,000 words, and again, the readership was amazing. And I really think that shows that we're in a new era, and we have to rethink how we do some of that. And I've always thought that one of the problems with long versus short is that it's not that the long stories are too long, it's that some of the short stories are too long. And so we have conversations often about, does a story really need to be that long? And there are some stories that really should just be a quick read, and we try to do that.
Mark, I know that you and I have spoken for a long period of time, and we could talk forever, but I know that we wanted to leave some space for questions. Is it okay with you if we take a few right now?
Absolutely.
All right, awesome. So we have Bart asking, our new group has had trouble breaking into TV broadcast. What material do you provide, and what level of editing is done? And how do you get the material to your producers?
Right now, we do it entirely through Zoom. And we're now to the point, we've watched a lot of programs to see how they do it, but we try to get reporters to set up a second camera, cell phone camera, when they're doing a Zoom interview to get the B-roll. And that's really the challenge. In fact, a great story about rethinking technology is on election night, we wanted to have basically our version of a satellite truck where reporters and anchors could have conversations as they're interviewing somebody. And as you know, there's no way to do that with a cell phone on a stand. But what we did is we had the reporters do the interviews on their cell phones, and then we had a second cell phone taped to their neck with an earplug. And it was that second cell phone that allowed the studio to go back and forth with people for the interviews. And it worked perfectly. It really worked right. I think television is a big one. And we have a lot of pushback from folks who have experience in television, who want to have things done the way television does things. And they want to use high-tech equipment, and we want to use cell phones. And those are conversations that I don't think ever will be resolved. But I think our default is use your iPhone. It's the best device in the world for recording. The biggest challenge is making sure you have good sound. And so if you have external mics and do things with the iPhone, you can get broadcast quality video without a lot of effort.
You're really speaking to my soul there with the good sound, Mark. I completely agree. We have a question from Jacqueline, and she's asking, could you address how ethnic minority media is carried by and integrated into mainstream news? And are there any problems there, and what are some solutions?
And this is another hour seminar.
We're going to keep going.
Yeah. I have to say, I view my work in diversity in mainstream media as one of the complete failures in my life. Nothing I did moved the needle. And that's as a hiring editor, that's as working on committees within different news organizations. We are at the same point we were 20 years ago. And to me, that's unconscionable. And I think what we're doing, which is so different, is creating our own ecosystem and having people pick up the ecosystem. And I think that's already been more effective. And I'll give you one example. So I'm a wonk and I love stories that nobody else cares about. And I wrote 2,500 words on the end of termination, which was a policy in the United States to terminate the relationship between the federal government and tribes, basically to break treaties. And there was an election in Washington state 50 years ago that ended that policy. And I wrote a 2,500 piece on that. Because of our partnership with AP, it got picked up. And I expected AP to pick up maybe 500 words, 600 words of it. They picked up the entire piece and ran it. And so I'm looking at this piece on a really arcane policy in newspapers all over the world. And I think that shows me the opportunity for doing it this way. I heard throughout my entire career, I can't find talent. We have had no problem hiring people. And not only that, but if I could double the size of this staff tomorrow, I know I could fill the jobs because the talent is there. That is not the problem. It's the folks looking at how do you hire.
Mark, you just connected so directly with a panel that we're doing tomorrow that was called "The Pipeline is Not the Problem," where we're talking exactly about that. The people are there. There's a connection that's not being made, and it's not about the talent being out there. We have a question from Lyle, who's asking, please tell us how you got an Australian audience. That's awesome.
There is a national Indigenous television network, and they saw us on Twitter, and they came back and said, can we carry your show? It's really weird because they have to carry it Saturday through Monday in order to hit the time shows zones, but it works, and we're very grateful for it.
Thank you. And then we have a question from Steve at Nonprofit Quarterly. He's asking, could you talk about the relationship between Indian Country Today and the Associated Press and how that's developed over time?
Sure. Well, and the big one, it just started because I was greedy. AP had an editor that I really wanted to hire. She was really talented, and I wanted her to be our managing editor. And so I went to her and I said, will you leave AP and come to work for us? And she said no. And so being someone who doesn't like being told no, I went back to her and said, well, what if we borrowed you for a year? And would your bosses buy that? And she's probably not, but we could ask. But they did. And she came to work for us for a year as managing editor. And she's since gone back to the AP. And during that year, she really helped build our systems internally, but also create a process for our stories to be shared on AP. And the one I'm really happy about, I know I mentioned my wonk story, but the one that really I think changes the narrative is our obituaries. Suddenly, stories about ordinary people, particularly during the pandemic, are getting carried out across the world in ways that I think really show the really humanity of Indian country in a new way. And I'm just really honored by that. AP has just been a great partner since then. We've worked with them on a project involving the 50th anniversary of Alcatraz, and we're always looking for new things to do with them. We've helped create a new setup, actually Katie Oyan did, which is called Story Share, and AP clients can actually share stories directly without going through AP editors. And so it's created even another channel for distribution.
Thank you. If anybody has other questions for Mark, please feel free to pop them in the chat. We have a few more minutes. And I know, Mark, that you were talking a little bit about digital distribution there, and I jumped in with some questions. So are there any thoughts you want to follow up with?
Yeah, I'm not sure where I was.
I'm sorry.
No worries. I was running fast.
Well, then I just want to say thank you to everybody for spending this time with us. And Jacqueline says, so awesome. Yes to Indian Country Today. And I want to encourage everybody. I read Indian Country Today on a daily basis. I follow on Facebook, and it has absolutely enriched my understanding of the world. I cannot recommend it enough. So when they said, would you interview Mark or will you be the support for Mark? I said, yes, absolutely. We have one last question here from Bart that I think we can fit in. Any advice on story choice for a white-run news group covering Indian country in South Dakota?
Well, first, Bart, you all do really good work. And I mentioned that to Jacqueline too, because and we're partnering with Jacqueline's own thing. To me, the big challenge is to make sure you spend the time to get into the story, and it's not to be in a hurry to do it. Because so many of these things, I think our community tends to have stories that go back 100 years, in some cases 10,000 years. And to be able to have that narrative in your mind, at least as you write the story, I think is critical. It's not about what happened 10 minutes ago, it's how it all fits together. One thing that always gives me sustenance, and Sarah mentioned them, Shoshone. Shoshone's hunted mastodon. And you think about the North American changes we're going through now with climate change and other things, we've been here. And whether or not we remember that directly or whether it's something that we have stories we can tap into, I think we need that context.
Thank you so much, Mark. Mark Trahan, editor of Indian Country Today. What a wonderful and inspiring story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody, I'm going to drop the link in the chat so that you can find your way back to the main room. You'll know you're in the right place because you'll see panelist slides scrolling by you, so you can feel secure. You're going to get a little break until quarter of the next hour. And I think, Mark, we can hang out here for a couple more minutes if anybody just wants to have a little chit chat and spend some time with Mark. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Or not.
Or not. I see you, Georgie. How are you?
I'm good. And you did such a great job, Mark. Thank you for presenting today and being a part of the agenda. Thank you, INN, for allowing us this opportunity for Indian Country Today to kind of show off there, which is fantastic. There's a lot of great things going on.
Yes, I know we'll see saying good things from you soon, too. We are already.
Thanks.
Well, Mark, we really appreciate your contributions that you've made to Alaska Center for Excellence in Journalism.
Thank you. We have a really fun project that we're working on with Alaska Center on 50 years after the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. And our first story actually ran this week.
Great.
I've got a question from Kim in the chat. She'd love to hear more about some of the most read stories at ICT.
Oh, this is easy and it's fun. Our most read story is about a Navajo grandmother selling jewelry on the internet during the pandemic. And awesome. That story's readership was just massive. And for good reason. It was very cute. It was wonderful.
And Laurie, I see your hand up there. Do you have a question? You can unmute yourself.
Unmute myself. Okay. Yeah.
We can hear you. We're good.
Oh, good. Okay. You mentioned earlier that you were giving content away. How I'm in Gig Harbor, we're trying to start a local newspaper. How would we request content from you?
You wouldn't even have to request it, just download it.
Really?
Copy and paste.
Without any kind of copyright. So, wow, because there's lots of movement. We've just renamed an estuary back to the native name in town. And so that story has not been told here. And so I'm grateful that we could use some of your stories.
Absolutely. The world moves so fast that I just think the idea of hoarding news just doesn't make sense anymore, especially with social media. And if you're open to it and pass it around, people are willing and you suddenly get credit. And I think you grow because of that. I just think it's a good thing to do. It's smart business.
That's fabulous. Thank you very much.
Bart is saying in the comments, I'm sure he's sure you know this, but Tim Gallego is officially retiring in July at age 87. And he called to you in a farewell note as one of the major players keeping journalism alive and well in Indian Country.
Grateful for that. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mark? Rob, any questions?
Yeah, Sarah and Mark, thank you. Mark, I just wanted to touch base. Let's definitely talk after this. I know you were preparing for your presentation, which we appreciate. So look forward to hearing from you when you have some time.
Great.
Sky, I see you there. Did you have anything you wanted to ask Mark? No pressure. David, New Mexico in depth, anybody? Feel free to unmute yourself and jump in if you'd like.
Hi, Mark. I just wanted to support you and join the group. You
Thanks,
did
Guy.
great. Thanks.
Thanks, Sky. All right. Well, I think we've just loved our time with you, Mark. I really could listen to you expand my mind for hours and hours. So I hope to get the chance to connect with you again soon, and so happy that you're part of INN.
Thank you. And I should mention Sky was an integral part of our growth, and so it's great to see her there. So.
Yay. Wonderful. All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Mark.